theyeshiva.net.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue now with our Gemarah class, Masechta Megillah, Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Today's class is dedicated by Dr. Michael and Liz Michelle, my dear friends, in loving memory of her mother, Shirley Levy, Sarah Pessel, Bas Reb Aryeh Leib, in honor of her first yahrzeit today on the 22nd day of Adar. Shirley Levy, of blessed memory, was one of the early founders of Monsey, our community. She devoted herself together with her husband to building the community, including yeshivas, shuls, and other Jewish institutions, while raising her family, and she's survived by 4 children, 16 grandchildren, 50 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. Tehei nishmasa tzrura b'tzar hachayim. Maybe she'd be a good to better for you, Dr. Michael and Liz Michelle, all of your children and grandchildren, the whole family, and all of the Jewish people. So please open up your Gemarahs, Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Yesterday, we discussed the 4 most beautiful women in the world, Sarah, Rachav, Avigail, and Esther. And according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, you take out Esther and you replace her with Vashti. Then the Gemarah spoke about Rachav, the Gemarah spoke about Yael, the Gemarah spoke about Avigail, and finally Michal, the daughter of Shaul, the wife of David HaMelech. And now we move on to the next topic. So, where are we? We're in the middle of the page. Mamash in the middle of the page, Tesvav Amud Aleph, the line starts, Li. Lo ichpas li, Amar le ki ka'amina biyoida u b'makira. At the words, Mordechai yada, es kol asher nasa. You see, the line starts, Li, Mamash in the middle of the page, Tesvav A, 15a. In the middle of the page, Mordechai yada, es kol asher nasa. In this chapter of Masechta Megillah, the Gemarah has been analyzing Megillah's Esther according to its chronological order, beginning with chapter 1. It started with the word Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh and moved on to discuss the feast of Achashverosh, his summoning of Vashti, the removal of Vashti, choosing Esther, appointing Esther as a queen, Mordechai's connection to the king, the assassination attempt over the king, appointing Haman as a prime minister, Haman's edict, which he managed to persuade the king to issue forth against the Jewish people. And here the Gemarah continues interpreting and giving its commentary on the next piece of the Megillah. And the Gemarah now begins analyzing chapter 4 of Megillah's Esther. Chapter 4 begins, Mordechai yada is kol asher nasa. Mordechai found out, he knew everything that happened. And the pasuk continues, let me read the whole pasuk. Mordechai yada es kol asher nasa, vayikra Mordechai es b'gadav, Mordechai tore his garments, vayilbash sak va'efer, he put on sackcloth and ashes, vayetze b'say cha'ir, vayizak ziyakah g'dayla umara. Mordechai goes out in the middle of the city, and he cries out with a great and bitter outcry. He yells, he sobs with a great and bitter outcry. Zaka G'dayla Omar. Asks the Gemarah, my Omar, what did Mordechai say in his outcry? It says Mordechai went out and he was screaming, and it was a zaka gedola, it was a great outcry, and it was mara, it was bitter. So the Gemarah understands from all these adjectives that the Megillah is using, was Mordechai saying something? What was he saying? My Omar, what was he saying? Rav Omar, Rav says he was screaming, Gava Haman me Achashverosh. Haman has become higher than Achashverosh. Gava, from the word Gavaya, Rashi says, Shemaloi liboy ledaber mashle Allah lev Achashverosh. Haman had the audacity, the chutzpah, to be able to speak words which Achashverosh would not think and entertain. Achashverosh would have never conceived of an idea so vile, so vicious, so evil to exterminate every single Jew in the empire, from young to old, in a single day. Achashverosh would have never thought of such an idea. Even if he didn't like the Jews, and we learned before that he didn't like the Jews. You remember the metaphor of the mound and the metaphor of the ditch on Daf Yudalad, a page earlier. And yet Haman had this chutzpah, this arrogance, to be able to suggest it and persuade the king to come under Haman's jurisdiction and follow his suggestion to kill all the Jews. Shmuel gives a very different interpretation. What Mordechai was screaming was Gavar Malki Lo Malka Tato. The higher king prevailed over the lower king. What does this mean? Rashi says, Gavar Malki Lo Kinoi Hu Lahepech B'Lashon Nekiya. This is a euphemism. Mordechai meant the opposite. The Gemarah is just using more refined language. What Mordechai meant was the lower king prevailed over the higher king. Meaning, Achashverosh, the king below, prevailed over Hashem, over the Almighty, the king above. Gavar Malka Lo Malka Tato is a euphemism. He meant in the opposite. He's just using refined language. The upper king prevailed over the lower king. Really, he meant the lower king prevailed over the higher king. This is what Mordechai was crying about. That God chose the people as his nation. God promised the Jewish people that they will be eternal. And yet, what happens here? Suddenly, the lower king prevailed with this decree to exterminate every single Jew. This is how Rashi learns it. The Marshal learns a little different. The Marshal says that Mordechai didn't mean it b'lashon nekiya. He didn't mean it in the opposite way. He meant literally that the higher king prevailed over the lower king, meaning this was a promise and a confidence that despite the pain and the anxiety, the higher king prevailed over the lower king, meaning God's promise to keep the Jewish people alive has prevailed over the lower king's attempt for genocide, and therefore it will not happen. Yes, the lower king is powerful, but the higher king is more powerful. Like we say in the Haggadah, right? God saves us. The Jewish people are like a lamb surrounded by 70 wolves. So therefore he was saying, according to the Marsha, very different than Rashi. Rashi is saying that this is a Lashon Nekiya, what's called Sagi Nahar. It means the opposite. It means the lower king prevailed over the higher king. Marsha says, no, he meant literally. The higher king prevailed over the lower king. Don't think that this is going to happen. This is what he was screaming. This is what he was crying. Where did Rav and Shmuel come up with these interpretations? So the commentators explain, because they looked at the word Za'aka G'doila Umara. Two words. Za'aka G'doila is a great cry and a bitter cry. So G'doila, they interpret as, he spoke about somebody's greatness. So Rav says, Haman became Gadol, greater than Achashverosh, or the lower king became greater, Gadol, than the higher king. And also the word Mara. Mara means bitter. Also Mara comes from the word betrayal, like Ben Sayer Umoira, Mamre, Mamrin, betrayal, when you betray somebody. Umara is a betrayal. There was a betrayal. Haman betrayed Achashverosh, and the lower king betrayed the higher king. What happens next? Mordechai heard everything that happened, and he's now crying bitterly. And what happens now? What happens now is they report the story to Esther. Mordechai was sitting in a sackcloth. He was sitting with ashes. He was sitting in front of the gate of the king. He couldn't go into the gate of the king because he can't walk in with a sackcloth, but he was sitting out there. So they came to Esther, the queen, and they told her. And what does the pasuk say? Vatischalchal hamalka. Vatischalchal hamalka means the queen was agitated. She was agitated. Now, let's remember the context of the story. This is chapter 4 of the Megillah. The decree came out. Mordechai is screaming and crying. He comes till the gate of the king in sackcloth. The maids who work for Esther come and they tell her, and it's a very interesting expression. She is full of agitation. That's the word. And she sends clothes in which to dress Mordechai so he could remove his sackcloth, but V'loi Kibel, he doesn't accept it. What happens afterwards is Esther summons somebody called Hasach, one of the servants of the king who he placed to help her, and she sends him to Mordechai to find out what is going on. The Sach goes to Mordechai. Mordechai is in the street of the city before entering the portal of the king, sitting in a sackcloth. Mordechai tells the Sach everything that happened with Haman, and he asks him to go back to Esther and ask her to speak to her husband and plead with him. Esther gives a message back to Mordechai through the Sach that she can't go in because she's going to die. She might die because she hasn't been summoned for 30 days into the king, and if you go in and he doesn't stretch out his golden scepter, you come out with a head shorter. And that's when Mordechai sends back his famous message to Esther that she will not be saved in the palace, and this is the reason she has become a queen. And that's when Esther tells him to tell the Jews to fast for 3 days. She will also fast, and then she will go into the king, even though she was not invited already for 30 days. That's basically the structure of chapter 4 of the Megillah, which is going to be the discussion in Tesvav Amud Aleph. So let's see. Says the Gemarah weiter. As I said, you're welcome to write your questions on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, or Facebook Live. And God willing, I will try to take some breaks and respond to questions as they come in. Vatischalchal hamalka, the queen was agitated. My vatischalchal, what does vatischalchal mean? It's a very unusual word. We have, every morning we say in the Shira, Parshas Beshalach, Chil achaz yoshvei floshas. A dread has taken on the city, the citizens of Philistine. When the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea, there was a dread that took over Yoshvei Ploshus, Chil. But here it says Vatischalchal. That's like a double chil. That's like a double dread. She was excessively agitated. What does it mean, Vatischalchal? Amar Rav says, Shapir Sanida. The tremendous dread and horrible news caused Esther to become a nida, to experience her emission of blood, her menstrual cycle of blood. For Rabbi Yirmiyah says, she needed to go to the bathroom. That's what the agitation caused. Rashi says on the word vatischalchal, nismasmes cholol gufa. The word vatischalchal, the Gemarah is saying, doesn't only mean dread, it also comes from the word cholol, which means the cavity of her body melted. So there's two interpretations. What happened? According to Rav, the blood started to emerge, she became a nida, and according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, it wasn't about the nida, it was about the regular human needs to go to the bathroom, but sometimes a person experiences so much anxiety and dread, and suddenly, without previous anticipation, this is what she felt she had to do. That's what is Chalchal HaMalka. Now, obviously, we need to understand what this means. Why would the Gemarah say this? Why is this relevant to us? Esther became a nida. Esther had to go to the bathroom. So you'll say, well, the Gemarah is just trying to explain the Megillah. Vatischalchal. What is vatischalchal? It's a very unusual word. So Rashi says that something melted or dissolved in the cavity, in the cholol, vatischalchal, the cholol, in the cavity, in the emptiness of her guf, of her body. Okay, granted. Why does the Megillah have to say this to us? So obviously, this is relevant. It's relevant to know that when Esther heard the news of what is happening with Mordechai, this is how she was impacted. I'm going to give you two interpretations. One comes from the Maharal of Prague. Rabbi Yehuda Leva of Prague was the rabbi of Prague, lived in the 16th century in Prague, and he wrote many, many works, including a work on the Megillah called Or Chadash, the New Light. And the Maharal says that the Megillah is trying to teach us something, the way the Gemarah understands it. One represents impurity, and one represents simply physical disgustingness, physical filth. Nida is part of the cycle of life. It happens usually every month. And it brings on what we call a form of ritual or spiritual impurity. It's called Tumah. The Gemarah says in Eruvin, Daf Kuf, it began with the Eitz Hadas, with the tree of knowledge, and it's part of the disalignment of our world with its source. You know how somebody lives a life of disalignment? This is what all Tumah is. Tumah also means there was a potential for purity, there was a potential for greatness, and that potential is dissolved, or that potential disintegrates, and that creates a situation of impurity. Every month, the woman's body creates a uterus preparing to hold new life. When that doesn't happen, the uterus breaks and dissolves, and that's what causes blood. This is a form of tumah. When somebody suddenly has to go to the bathroom and they're overtaken by that experience, the Maharal says this is not called impurity, but it's a form of mius. It's not comfortable. It's repulsive. It's filthy. It's dirty. Says Maharal, what does the news about Haman do to an Esther? The argument between Rav and Rabbi Yirmiyah is what it does to an Esther. One opinion is it brings on tumah. Another opinion is it brings on disgust. And the Maharal says those are two different experiences, and the one who understands knows that they're completely different. There's two things about Haman. There's two things about anti-Semitism, about Jew hatred, about the ego of Haman. First of all, it's impurity. It's toxic impurity. The second thing is it's disgusting. It's vile. One is it's a complete disconnection from any truth, from any purity, from any spiritual awareness. Complete disalignment. That's what impurity is. That's what tumah is. A complete, you're stuffed, you're dull, you're not receptive, you don't have antennas to be able to experience anything deeper and purer in life. That's called tumah. That's a spiritual malady. And then there's mius, which is disgusting. The argument is, what affected Esther when she heard Haman? Was it something we call disgust or something we call tumah? What is it? In other words, what happens to Esther is basically an embodiment of what Haman is. It's basically a physical manifestation of Haman. What is the physical manifestation of Haman? Is the physical manifestation of Haman excrement or urine? Is that the physical manifestation of Haman? Or is the physical manifestation of Haman impure blood? There's another interpretation by Reb Shimon Seifer. Reb Shimon Seifer was the rabbi of Krakow, and he wrote a letter to his son, and it's quoted in the introduction to a sefer called Michtav Seifer. And he gives a different interpretation in the Gemarah. And he says, earlier we had on Daf Yud Beis that the students of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai asked him why the Jews of that generation deserved such a decree of extermination. So he told them to tell him, to give the answer themselves. And the answer that was given was because Nenu Misudasa Shalaisei Rasha. They enjoyed the feast of the wicked king Achashverosh. So he said, that was only the Jews in Shushan. What about the Jews elsewhere? And then he gave the second answer, Hishtachavu L'Tzelem. Because in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, a few decades earlier, a few years earlier, they bowed down to pagan idols. Says Reb Shimon Seifer, a tzaddik lives what happens in his generation. A tzaddik is not detached from the generation. What happens in the tzaddik's life is a mirror of what's happening in the generation. Esther Hamalka was the Queen Esther, and one of the most righteous people of the generation. And that's why she saves the Jewish people. We have the two opinions in Gemarah. What caused the decree of Haman? Was it bowing down to the pagan gods, or it was eating and enjoying the meal of Achashverosh? Says Reb Shimon Seifer, those are the two opinions in the Gemarah. The two opinions in the Gemarah of Rav and Reb Yirmiyah are consistent with those two opinions. The Mishnah tells us in Shabbos chapter 9 that the Chachamim imposed on every Avodah Zarah Tumah like a Nida. Avodah Zarah is metame. It's a source of impurity. It's a fascinating idea. And there's a source for it in the Torah, the famous Rambam from Yaakov Avinu. Avodah Zarah, idolatry, becomes a source of impurity like a Nida. So the opinion that says that Esther Hamalka experienced Tumas Nida is because she experienced the tumah, the impurity of the Avodah Zarah of the Jewish people. Rabbi Yirmiyah says the reason for the decree was because of the meal of Achashverosh. That was the issue. And as a result of that, their intestines, their abdomen, their stomach, their digestive system became damaged. Because when a Jew eats non-kosher food, or when a Jew eats food that he or she should not be eating, it's not healthy for the digestive system of the Jew. And that's why Esther suddenly experienced this unnatural need to go to the bathroom, which represented the fact that there was a dysfunction in the digestive system, in the intestines, etc. Why? Because Esther was experiencing the plight of the Jewish people whose intestines were damaged as a result of their consuming the meal of Achashverosh. So this argument in Gemarah, what is Chalchal Hamalka, is consistent with the two views of what brought about the tragedy of Haman's decree. So we have two different explanations. I gave you the Maharal's explanation, a little more abstract, and Reb Shimon Seifer's explanation. Continues the Gemarah, Vatikra Esther lahasach. What happens now? Esther summons the Sach, and she sends him to Mordechai in order to find out what's happening. Now, this Hasach is never mentioned before or after. Who is he? We assume when the Tanakh says a name, and this is a name that's going to be quoted a few times, and we know nothing about him, it's trying to tell us something. Could have just said, one of the servants of the king. If you tell me something about the person, so it's important for our history to know it, the Torah wants us to know it. But here he doesn't say anything about Hasach. So therefore he continues, Vatikra Esther Hasach, Amar Rav, Rav said, Hasach zed Daniel. The Sach is Daniel. V'lama nikra shmai Hasach, shechatachu migduloseh. They cut him down from his greatness during the days of Achashverosh. Daniel was one of the young Jewish boys who was exiled by the Babylonian emperor Nebuchadnezzar and came to Babylonia, and he was taken to the palace because of his beauty, his maturity, his brilliance, and he rose in power. He became one of the great advisors to the Babylonian kings, to the point that in the days of Belshazzar, the last Babylonian king, the one who succeeded Evil-Merodach, who succeeded Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel was literally the third one in power. Third to the king in terms of power. And this continued after Belshazzar's assassination in the times of Daryavesh, and it continued in the times of Koresh, Cyrus, the king of Persia. Yesterday we spoke about the history. When Achashverosh became a king, Hasach is from the word chatoch. He was cut down. You see, in the Hebrew language, the letter Hey and the letter Ches are interchangeable. So Hasach can also be read like chatoch, chaticha, like a piece, chatoch or chatoich, cut. Chaticha is a cut piece. So chatoch, he was cut down from his greatness in the times of Achashverosh. That's why he's called Hasach. That's what Rashi tells us here. Rashi says, Belshazzar made him rule as third in the empire, third to the king. The same is true Daryavesh, who replaced Belshazzar. in Daniel chapter Vav. He was extremely successful. Achashverosh cut him down. That's why he's called Hasach. And this is the Daniel who was now working for Esther, and she sent him to Mordechai, which would explain, of course, why she sent him, because as we will soon see in the Gemarah, she sends him with a message that is very Jewish. And it seems like then that she would send a Jew. We'll soon see what she spoke about, what she told Hasach to speak to Mordechai about. Now, if so, it seems like Hasach was a Jew, but we never find Hasach, a Jew, working for Achashverosh. We do know that Daniel worked for the Babylonian and the Persian kings. So that's why the Gemarah is assuming that this Hasach is really a nickname for Daniel. Shmuel says he's called Hasach, Shekol Divrei Malchus Nechtochin al Piv. All the words of the kingdom, all the words of the king, Nechtochin al Piv, get established, they get cut, they get fixed through his mouth. Meaning, Shmuel says he was not removed from his greatness. Even in the days of Achashverosh, he continued to serve as a trusted advisor of the king, and he's not called Hasach because he was cut down from his greatness, but on the contrary, because he's the one who had the power to cut to the chase, as they say, to establish and define the Divrei Malchus, the edicts and the words of the monarch. What does she ask this Hasach to do? The pasuk says, "Vatetzaveu al Mordechai ladas maze v'al maze." She instructs him to go to Mordechai to find out what is this and for what is this. Maze v'al maze. Very interesting term. So on a literal level, some of the commentators will say to find out maze, what is going on, what happened, v'al maze, and why it happened. What's the source of it? You know, what's the nature of the issue and what's the source? Ve'al maze. But still, it's a very unusual expression. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Shalchaloi, Esther sent a message to Mordechai, Shema Avri Yisrael al Chamishachum Shetorah. Perhaps the Jewish people have transgressed the Chamishachum Shetorah, the 5 books of Torah. That's perhaps what happened. The Ksiv Bahen, it says about the Torah, Mizeh u'mizeh hen ksuvim. In Parshas Kisisa, when Moshe is coming down with the first tablets of the 10 Commandments, it says they were engraved all the way from one side to another side. Mizeh u'mizeh hen ksuvim. They're written on both sides. The letters of the 10 Commandments were engraved on the tablets, and they could be written from both. They could be read from both sides. Mizeh u'mizeh hen ksuvim. They're written on this side. They're written on that side. So the word is mizeh u'mizeh. So when Esther says to Mordechai, Ladas mazeh v'al mazeh, it's Ladas mizeh u'mizeh, to find out what happened. Perhaps the Jews have abandoned those tablets. They have abandoned the Luchos Habris, which contain all of the Chamisha Chumash Torah. All of the 613 mitzvahs in the 5 books of Moses are all intimated and hinted in the 10 Commandments in the Luchos. The Luchos with the 10 Commandments encompass the whole Chamisha Chumash Torah. So therefore, it's also interesting because in the 10 Commandments you have 620 words, which correspond to the 613 biblical mitzvahs and the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, because the 10 Commandments are considered the klal, the general words that encompass the whole Chamisha Chumash Torah. Ladas mazeh v'al mazeh. She wants to find out mizeh u'mizeh. That's the hint. That's what she's sending to us. Tell me the inner secret of what's happening. In other words, Esther wasn't just interested in knowing the political facts on the ground, the news that happened. She also wanted to know the pnimius of it. Mazeh v'al mazeh. Because nobody has control over the Jewish people. Only God has control. Did they perhaps forfeit somewhat of their relationship with God? Did they neglect the Chamisha Chumash Torah? And that's why it's happening, because if not, nobody would have control over the Jewish people. She wanted to understand the spiritual cause for this decree in order to know how to repeat it. The Maharal asks a question, why is she mentioning the Luchos? It's all of the Torah. It's not just the Ten Commandments, it's all of the Torah. Why does she mention the luchas mizeh mizeh ksuvim? And he says something, it is abstract. And what he says is, let me just see if there's a question. Let me just open that page. Okay, somebody's asking about the age of Esther Hamalka, how old she was, and if she was allowed to, why did she allow herself to go and live with the king? We'll get to that soon, okay? Good questions, we'll get to that. So the Maharal says something, it's profoundly abstract, but I'm just going to say it very brief. You can look it up if you want on your own in the Ar Chadash of the Maharal. His point is this. He says the fact that you could read the tablets from both sides, I could look at the luchos and read the Ten Commandments, and I could go to the other way, the other side, and read it exactly the same, meant that it was something beyond nature. In fact, we learned earlier that the luchos were engraved through and through, which means that the mem and the samach had to be suspended in mid-ear because it was engraved through and through, so it didn't have the backdrop of a rock to be engraved on. So this was a unique phenomenon that you could read it from both sides, which represented the fact that the luchos are completely beyond the physical world. They're completely beyond. They were physical, but they were completely not defined by the laws that govern physical properties of our planet and of our cosmos. The fact that the Jewish people received the luchos meant that they were connected to that reality. So Esther was saying, if there is such a decree that the Jewish people can't live in this world, what happened? Ladas almaza, ladas maza v'almaza. Is it possible that they lost the luchos? The luchos were once again broken in their lives. And because they lost the luchos, therefore, they cannot have existence within the physical world. This is how the Maharal explains why she speaks about the luchos. The words of the Maharal are that the luchos represent the fact that the Torah is a seichel borur ma'od. It's an absolutely divine intellect that has no impurity in it, no toxicity in it. It doesn't get affected by the physicality of the world. It's purely divine, transcendent. It's the ultimate purity of the world. And therefore, when you're operating on that level and when you're connected to that level, and you neglect it, so the Jewish people can't survive anymore in the world. They can't be anymore in the physical world. That's how Esther is understanding what may have happened here. If somebody is not attached to the luchos, so okay, they're living in this world as part of physical beings, but the Jewish people are representative of that luchos. So it's one of two: either they're connected to the luchos, and then they're in the world, but they're completely transcendent of it. And if not, if they lose that relationship, then he says they can't have a place. They can't have a place in this world. Vayagidu Mordechai es divrei Esther. What happens next? The Sach goes to Mordechai, and he tells Mordechai everything that happened. He tells Mordechai Esther's message. Mordechai tells him everything that happened. He goes back and tells Esther what Mordechai said. Esther tells the Sach to tell Mordechai that she can't go because she might be killed. But here's something very interesting happens. The Sach now comes back to Mordechai to give the message. In fact, after Esther gives him the message that she can't go, it says, Vayagidu Mordechai is divrei Esther. They told Mordechai the words of Esther. Who's they? What happened to Sach? He's the messenger. Because he's the messenger, where did he disappear to? It says, Vayagidu Mordechai is divrei Esther. They told Mordechai the words of Esther. What's Vayagidu Mordechai is divrei Esther? What about the Sach? He never went back. He never went back to Mordechai. Other messengers of Esther went to Mordechai. He never went back. Why? From here you learn that it's inappropriate to go back and tell the person who sent you that this mission is not happening and is not going to take place. And that's why the Sach did not want to go back to Mordechai and tell him, I'm sorry, but Esther refused to fulfill your mission. Eid Meshivin al HaKalkala. Rashi says, Shahisa Esther Munas Love el HaMelech. Esther felt she can't go to the king. She must decline the plea of Mordechai. The Sach did not want to go back to the one who sent him, Mordechai, and say, sorry, Kalkala, this is not going to happen. He just felt it's inappropriate, and Esther had to send other people to give this message to Mordechai. So you see, most people, when they read the story, it just looks like, Esther calls a Sach, she sends him to Mordechai, Mordechai sends the Sach back, Esther sends the Sach, and they tell Mordechai the words of Esther. No, something is off. Hasach should have told it to Mordechai. It says, Vayagidul Mordechai is divrei Esther. This means that the Sach from Esther, he went elsewhere. He did not want to go report to Mordechai that Esther said no. What happens now? Mordechai challenges Esther and says, don't think you're going to be saved. You will not be saved. The Jewish people will be saved, but you and your father's home will perish. And who knows if this is not the reason you have reached your position as queen to save the Jewish people. And at this point, Esther sends back a message to Mordechai. And what's the message? Go gather all of the Jews in Shushan, and I want you to fast, not eat and not drink for 3 days. Me and my maids will also fast, and that's how I will come into the king. And then she uses those fateful words, Uvechein avei al hamelech asher lo chadas. I will come to the king not according to das, not according to the law. V'chasher avadati avadati. And as I was lost, I will be lost. What does this mean? Says the Gemarah, Leich Knesses Kol HaYehudim Uvechein avei al hamelech asher lo chadas. Amar Reb Abba said, Shaloi kadas. What does it mean? It's not going to be according to the law. It's not going to be according to the das. What does it mean? Literally, you could say it's not going to be according to the law of the king, because there is a law by Achashverosh that nobody could go into his chamber without an invitation. And Esther is about to violate that law, risking and endangering her life. That's the literal interpretation. I will come to the king in a way that is not according to the law. And yet, that is already clear, because she already said to Mordechai that 30 days I have not been summoned. And yet she says, I'm going to go to the king. So he says, every single day I used to go to the king, but it was coerced. And this is the first time I'm going to go willingly. Just like I was lost from the house of my father, she was an orphan, she had no father and no mother, I will also be lost from you. What does this mean? Esther is telling Mordechai, till now I used to go to the king every day, but it was a coercion. I did not want to go. I did not want to be with him. If she would not comply, the king would have executed her. Just like he executed Vashti for not listening to him, he would have executed Esther. So Esther was forced to go into Achashverosh whenever he wanted, which, as we learned before, was basically every day. This is the first time that she's going to be going in on her own volition. She's not being summoned, she's not being forced. This is the first time she's offering herself to go to Achashverosh, which she knew very well may result in intimate relationships. This is the first time it's going to be berotz and not bo'inus. So Reb Abba is saying this is what she meant. Uvechein avei al hamelech asher lo chados. She didn't say lo kedas hamelech, not according to the law of the king, not according to the law. Which law? The law of Torah. According to the law of Torah, she's now going to do something that is lo kados. It's not according to the regular law of Torah. She's going to go in willingly to be with Achashverosh, and therefore she says b'chasher avadati avadati. Rashi says ad achshav nivalti me'oin ba'oinus. Till now I had intimate relationships, but it was coerced. V'achshav mikan ve'elach midaiti. From today, it's going to be with my das, with my consent. I am offering myself to Achashverosh. Avadati memcha v'asura ani lecha. From now I will be prohibited to you. The Eishes Yisrael shenensa muteris l'baylo b'rotzen asura l'baylo. A Jewish wife, the wife of a Yisrael, who was violated, who was raped, who was forced into a relationship, she can go back to her husband. It's not a problem. But if willingly she went into a promiscuous relationship, she's not allowed to go back to her husband. So Esther says, we learned before that Esther was married to Mordechai. And she used to be with Achashverosh, but then she would go to the mikveh, and then she would go back to the bosom of Mordechai, and then she went back to the palace every single day. This had to stop. Esther says, this will have to stop. Because till this point, she was an anusa. She was forced. It was not her choice. But now it's going to be her choice. Now it's going to be biratzon. Now she has to go willingly into Achashverosh. Once she's doing this willingly, she'll never be able to go back to Mordechai. This is going to be Esther's personal tragedy. So, just like I lost my father and mother, she never had parents. She was an orphan. We learned before in the Megillah, Ein la'ava ein. But she had Mordechai. Mordechai was her cousin, and Mordechai was her husband. And she says, avadati, kach oived mimcha, I'm going to lose you. Why am I going to lose you? Because I will not be able to be intimate with you any longer, because she is going into Achashverosh willingly. Now, of course, Esther was not regretting what she was doing, because Esther understood that this is what has to be done in order to save the entire Jewish people from the horrific decree of the Hitler of the generation, of Haman. So Esther was not regretting what she was doing, but Esther was defining the level of sacrifice that she was engaged in. She was not only violating the law of the Achashverosh, who didn't summon her into the palace, she was also doing something far more drastic. Tosfos asks here a very fascinating question. Take a look at Tosfos. The second Tosfos on Teskov Amar Aleph. Kashem, you see, Kashem shavadati mimcha kach. Kashem shavadati mimbeis abba kach avadati mimcha. V'im toimer, amayla hoya megarsha. Utehem uteres lach zirena. Tosfos says, why didn't Mordechai divorce her? If Mordechai was married to her, give her a get, so she's not married to Mordechai. Now she can go to Achashverosh, and then he's permitted to take her back when the moment permits it. When the moment permits it, he can take her back, because they weren't married. Give her a get. He was married to Esther. Give her a divorce. Let her go to Achashverosh. Okay, so she had relations with a non-Jew, even willingly, but she could marry a Jewish man afterwards. She didn't do it during her marriage. He gave her a get. Great question. Answers Tosfos, a get has to happen with witnesses. The whole work of a get has to be with witnesses. And Mordechai was afraid to bring in anybody into this plan. He was frightened that if you bring in witnesses, this story could get known to the king. And this would, of course, endanger Esther's life and Mordechai's life. Because all Achashverosh has to hear is that his wife, his queen Esther, has somebody else, Mordechai. That's all Achashverosh has to hear. Now, he was Mr. Paranoid, right? Vashti didn't show up, and he had her killed. He had a party for 187 days because he wanted to show off his beauty. Achashverosh was a paranoid man. And you see there were people who tried to assassinate him too. The worst thing you can do to Achashverosh is tell him that your Queen Esther, who came instead of Vashti, has Mordechai on the side. And if Mordechai gives a get, and there's two witnesses who know it, this means that people know. And once people know, they say, Aznayim l'koisel, right? Even the walls have ears. Once people know, the king could find out. And therefore, Mordechai did not want to divorce her. And that's why Esther said, V'chasher avadati, avadati. Which, by the way, answers another question, and this the Maharsha points out. Why did Mordechai divorce her initially? One of the students at the Shir asked us, when learning the Gemarah, that Mordechai was married to her. Why didn't he divorce her initially? Mordechai was married to Esther, and then she was taken to the king. Mordechai should have given her a divorce. Instead of her being a married woman and having to go to Achashverosh, he could have given her a divorce. But now we have the answer. Same idea. The same idea. Because Mordechai did not want that Achashverosh should find out what is happening. Now it's true, Esther was taken by coercion. She didn't want to go. But still, it would seem appropriate that Mordechai should divorce her, so she shouldn't be considered a married woman. It's a whole different status if it's a married woman who's taken or an unmarried woman who's taken. So why did Mordechai not give her a get in the beginning so she wouldn't be a married woman when she goes to Achashverosh? The answer, of course, is Achashverosh, knowing that there is another husband involved and he had to now give her a divorce in order to go to the king, this could have posed a lot of problems and a very serious danger for Mordechai, and therefore he did not want to do it. Now, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, the Yaris Dvash, asks a fascinating question. He says, how many witnesses do you need? 2. In the whole Shushan, they couldn't find 2 confidential Jews. You couldn't find 2 Jews who know how to hold a secret. 2 Jews in the room that are going to go running to Achashverosh. I understand certain Jews are yentas. It goes on WhatsApp right away. But from all the Jews in the empire, you couldn't find 2 confidentially reliable people. So the Yaris Vash, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, gives the following explanation. He says, when the Pasuk introduces Mordechai the first time in the Megillah, it says, Mordechai, Ish Yehudi Hayabashun Abirish, my Mordechai, ben Yair, ben Shimi, ben Kish, Ish Yemini. And if you realize, many generations were skipped because of Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi. Shimi ben Gemarah was in the time of David HaMelech. He cursed David. So Mordechai was in the time of the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. This is hundreds and hundreds of years ago, more than 400 years before. So you skipped a lot of generations. Mordechai ben Yair, and you didn't go to his father. You go to his great-great-great-grandfather called Shimi Kish from the tribe of Binyamin. Why is that? The answer is, he says, because in Shushan, there were other Jews who had the same name, Mordechai, and they had the same father's name, Yair. And therefore, because it was a popular name, if you just say Mordechai ben Yair, you wouldn't know who he was, because there were other Mordechai ben Yair, right? It's like Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Cohen, Mr. Klein, Mr. Gross. Thank you, I know 1,000 of them. So Mordechai ben Yair was a very popular name, so it wouldn't be a good sign of identification. You couldn't even say Mordechai ben Yair ben XYZ because there were a lot of those too. There were a lot of people in Shushan or in the Persian Empire that had the name Mordechai. Their father was Yair, and the Yair's father was the same name like the father of Mordechai's Yair's. Yair's father's name by Mordechai that name was shared by many other Jews. Many other Jews had the name Mordechai. Their father was Yair, and their grandfather had the same name like Yair's father. So how do you identify Mordechai? So you had to skip many generations. Mordechai ben Yair all the way back to Shimi, because that was a unique identification mark for Mordechai. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, by a get, you can skip the generations. You have to write the name of the father. So you have to write Mordechai ben Yair. Mordechai ben Yair, but that wouldn't help. Why wouldn't it help? Because there were other Mordechai ben Yair. So you have to write Yair's father, but that also wouldn't help because there were other Mordechai ben Yairs who had the name of Mordechai's grandfather. So that wouldn't help. The Gemarah says in Baba Basra that if you have 2 people and their name is Yosef ben Shimon, and they live in the same city, and one of them divorces his wife, you have to bring the other one to be there at the get. Why? Because if you just write Yosef ben Shimon, we don't know which Yosef ben Shimon it is. There's another Yosef ben Shimon who lives in this city. So the Gemarah says in Baba Basra that when Yosef ben Shimon divorces, Baba Basra daf kuf samach zayin, they can only get divorced one in front of the other. So if Mordechai wanted to give a get to Esther, who would have to be at the get? Not just 2 witnesses. You would have to bring every single other Mordechai ben Yair who was in Shushan, because there were many Mordechai ben Yairs, and even Yair's father wouldn't be enough because there were others. So you would have to bring all of them in. Any Mordechai ben Yor you would have to bring in. And there were many, including Jews who you couldn't trust. They weren't confidential, they were impulsive, they were impetuous, they were spies, they were self-hating Jews. You had all these types of people. That's what Tosfos means. Mordechai was afraid it's going to be public because it wasn't only two people, it was much more than two people. Which now brings us to another question. Why didn't Esther sacrifice her life the first time? Now I understand she's not sacrificing her life. Why? Because Esther understands that this is her job to go into Achashverosh and do what she has to do in order to save the Jewish people. Even though this means she's going to become forbidden to Mordechai. But the question is, initially when Esther was taken to Achashverosh, why didn't she sacrifice her life? Why didn't she say, I'm a Jewish girl, I'm not going to go live with a non-Jew? Especially if she's married and he didn't give her a get. Okay, so he didn't give her a get because she didn't want she should die or he should die. But the question is a much bigger question. Why did she agree to go? So you say, well, he's going to kill her. But isn't this adultery? You're going to live with a non-Jew, especially when you didn't even get a get. So why did Esther agree to go to Achashverosh in the first place? That is a very important question, and it's raised in the Gemarah in Masechta Sanhedrin of Ayin Daled Amud Beis. And basically, the Gemarah says over there two things. Number one, Esther was Karka Olam. Karka Olam means she was passive. Because she was passive, she did not do anything. There was no activity on her part. So there was no action on her part, so she was not obligated to sacrifice her life. If she was doing an act of adultery, it would be different. But since she's Karka Olam, that's what the Gemarah says there. Abaye says, Sanhedrin 74b, because she was completely passive, therefore she was not obligated to sacrifice her life. That's one explanation. Another explanation, Rava says, over there in the Gemarah, Hanos Atzmon Shaini. Achashverosh did this completely for his own enjoyment. This was not an attempt to take her away from Judaism, from God, from faith. He didn't even know she's Jewish. Because he was doing it completely for his own enjoyment, so then Esther again was not obligated to sacrifice her life. Rabbeinu Tam over there adds that another idea is that intimacy with a non-Jew is not considered committing adultery. It's not considered Gilui Arayis, one of the three cardinal principles for which you have to die. And that's another reason she did not have to die rather than go to Achashverosh. So we have one idea is that she was a Karka Olam, meaning there was no action on her part. She was completely passive in the act of intimacy. The other idea is that Achashverosh's purpose was his own enjoyment and not to take her away from Judaism, so she didn't have to die. And then there is Rabbeinu Tam's explanation over there in Sanhedrin Ayin Daled Amud Beis that because she was with a non-Jew, it's not considered Gilui Arayis adultery, and therefore she did not have to die. That's all why she went to Achashverosh, and she was not obligated to die. And obviously, perhaps she had a hunch, or Mordechai had a hunch, that God is orchestrating through his divine providence quite interesting developments. At this point, though, Esther willingly went to Achashverosh. She was not summoned. She went, and she knew he may have intimacy with her, and she was really doing a great mitzvah. Why? Because she did it for one purpose, to save the Jewish people from death, and she knew that from now on she's going to become forbidden to Mordechai because she's going in willingly to have relationships with Achashverosh, who still did not know that she's Jewish. Let's continue. Fascinating. Reb Shlomo Kluger. Reb Shlomo Kluger was the Rav of Brod. The Rav of Brod in the 18th and 19th century. And he says something fascinating. He wrote, I think, over 100 svarim. He says, if you look at the Megillah, this is such a powerful, lovely observation. Esther is never called a queen. Achashverosh loves her, he chooses her, he puts the crown on her, he gives her the melucha, he makes a big party for her. She's never defined as a queen. she's defined as Esther. When is the first time she is defined as a queen? The first time? The beginning of chapter 5. She tells Mordechai at the end of chapter 4, I'm going into the king, not according to the law. On the third day, she gets dressed up and she goes to the king, and it says he sees Esther Hamalka. He sees the queen, Esther the queen. It's the first time she's called a queen. Why? So Shlomo Kluger says it's based on this Gemarah, because until this point, it was all coerced. She was not choosing to be a queen, to be his wife. She was coerced, so she doesn't have the title of a queen. But this is the first time she consents to the relationship. B'rotzei. So that's why the Megillah changes her title, and suddenly, for the first time after this moment, she becomes Esther Hamalka. It's interesting. The Tiferes Shloimeh says V'chasher avadati has a different interpretation. What's the interpretation of Chasher avadati? So the Gemarah says avadati mi beis Abba kach oived mincha. I was lost from my father's home. I didn't have parents. I grew up as an orphan, and now I don't have you either. The Tiferes Shloimeh says another interpretation. Chasher avadati means from this world and from the next world. From this world and from the next world. Meaning, you can ask a question, was she right to go in now? If she's going in willingly, so she's doing this to save the Jewish people. But you can really ask a question. What about herself? She may be committing a sin, as you'll say. You're saving the whole Klal Yisrael. Perhaps she was allowed to do it. She was not going in just for her own benefit. Is it a form of Gilui Arayos? So we said he's not Jewish. Rabbi Tam said it's not Gilui Arayos. We said she's passive, so it's not Gilui Arayos. We said that Achashverosh is doing it for his own benefit, so it's not Gilui Arayos. Okay, but after everything's said and done, she is literally giving up her own moral purity for the sake of the Jewish people. So the Tiferes Shloimeh says, "V'chasher avadati." It's not just a loss in this world; it's a loss for the next world also. She is sacrificing her own spiritual purity to go be with this Achashverosh. Why? In order to save the Jewish people. He says that's the meaning. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha. Love God with your heart and with your soul. The soul represents the life of the soul is Olam Haba, the spiritual life of paradise. That's the life of the soul. This is the life of the body. A Jew ought to love God that he's ready to give up not only his Olam Haza, also his Olam Haba for this relationship. That's how real, that's how powerful the relationship is. Esther was ready to give up everything for the Jewish people. Even her relationship with God, even her spiritual life, which represents the deepest type of a relationship. There's no self-interest here whatsoever, not even a spiritual self-interest. And the Tiferes Shloimeh says this is what inspired the Jewish people. The Gemarah says, Kimu v'kiblu ha'Yehudim. Remember we learned earlier, Kimu masher kiblu kvar. They re-accepted upon themselves the Torah. He says they didn't want to accept themselves the Torah. Why? Because it creates punishments and consequences if you transgress. Better not to accept it, and you're not held accountability. But from Esther, they learned that some relationships are so precious, it's worth to give everything up for them. That's what they learned from Esther. That's how he explains the v'chasher avadati. Let's learn for another few minutes. Says the Gemarah, Leich knoises kol ha'Yehudim. Esther tells Mordechai, go gather all the Jews and I'm going to go into the king Shaloi Kados. What's the next step? What happens next? The next thing that happens is Vayavar Mordechai. It's a fascinating pasuk. After Esther, opening up my Megillah, chapter 5, after Esther tells Mordechai to gather all the Jewish people and fast, Vayavar Mordechai. Vayas kechelish etzivsal of Esther. What does Vayavar Mordechai? Literally, it means he announced, he passed an announcement, and he did everything that Esther commanded him. But really, the word Vayavar is like the word Avera. Mordechai transgressed. Says the Gemarah, Vayavar Mordechai, Amarav shehevri yom rishon shel Pesach b'tainas. Mordechai passed through the first day of Pesach with a fast. That's what Vayavar means. That's what Vayavar means. He passed, he went through the first day of Pesach with a fast, which some explain, Vayavar would mean also he transgressed. In other words, he violated the laws of Pesach. What does this mean? What does this mean? When you read the Megillah, Haman had the letters, the edict against the Jewish people signed on the 13th day of Nisan. Mordechai finds out what happens. He puts on the sack, he sends a message to Esther. Esther sends back a message, gather all the Jews and fast for 3 days. When did the fast begin? So the fast probably was Yud Dalet, Tesvav, and Tezayin. So that means that the first day of Pesach, none of the Jews ate. So the first day of Pesach, instead of being a Yom Tov, a holiday to celebrate, what was it? It was a day of kindness. That's Vayavar Mordechai. Mordechai passed through the first day of Pesach with a fast. Rashi says, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, Shrei B'Yud Gimel B'Nissen Nichtavu Igros. The letters were written on the 13th of Nisan. V'nitan adas b'Shushan. And that's when the law in Shushan was communicated to kill the Jewish people 11 months later. Yud Gimel Adar. V'Yud Dalet v'Chamisha Asar v'Shisha Asar Isanu. So they fasted on 3 days. On Yud Dalet, Tesvav, and Tezayin. Erev Pesach, the first day of Pesach, the second day of Pesach. U'b'Shisha Asar nitla Haman be'erev. And on the 16th, Haman was hung in the evening. What is Rashi telling us here? Rashi is saying there's a fast for 3 days. Yud Gimel Nisan is when the decree came out. That's when Mordechai and Esther were negotiating back and forth. Esther says, make a fast, 3 days. Yud Dalet is the first day. Tesvav is the second day. Tezayin is the third day. Those are the 3 days. Now, what did Esther tell? What happened? Esther went in, it says, and she invited Achashverosh to a party. When did she go in? It says, Vayhi b'yom hashlishi. She went in on the 3rd day, and she invited Achashverosh to a party. Achashverosh came to the party that evening, and he asked her what she wants. She says, come back to a second party, the next evening. At the second party, Haman was hung, right? The second party, Haman was hung because he prepared the night before. He came to tell Mordechai about the tree that he prepared for Haman. And the night before, Achashverosh couldn't sleep. And in the morning, Haman came to tell him about the tree. And that day, he took Mordechai around Shushan on the horse. And then that evening, he came to the party and he was executed. He was hung on that tree that he prepared for Mordechai. That was at the second party. So Rashi says, on the 16th of Nisan, Haman was hung. But here we have a little problem. Because if Esther went in on the 3rd day, that would have been Tezayin Nisan. So Haman would have been hung on Yud Zayin Nisan. So some people, Taka, put into Rashi here a little bit of correction. Some people have a version, Nitla Haman be'erev acher yom shisha asar. Meseres Hashas bring. Haman was hung not on the 16th, but on the evening after the 16th, which means on the 17th day. So that would be a serious correction in Rashi. However, you could learn that Rashi holds that when Esther went in on the 3rd day, he doesn't mean on the 3rd day of the fast. He means on the 3rd day of the decree. So the decree was Yud Gimel. The fast started Yud Dalet Tesvav Tezayin. Esther went in on Tesvav, the first day of Pesach, the 3rd day of the decree. She went in the middle of her fast. And she invited him to the first party. The first party was Tesvav. That night, the king couldn't sleep. The next day was Tezayin. That night was the second party, that evening, and that's when Haman was hung. And then it would be very accurate that Rashi says that Haman was executed on the 16th day of Nisan, which is the second day of Pesach. In fact, it's brought in halacha that on the second day of Pesach, you should add something to your meal in commemoration for the meal that Esther made for Haman and Achashverosh, that meal which brought the salvation of Purim and the Jewish people. So at our meal, the second day of Pesach, the halacha brings, you should add something special. Something special to the meal. That's a special commemoration for the party, for the meal that Esther made in the palace with the king and Haman, which brought about the salvation of Purim. So that's the idea of the 3-day fast, according to however way you learn it. The fast included the first day of Pesach. So this was unique that Esther said to fast for 3 days, and the Jewish people did not eat on Pesach. Imagine, no Seder, no matzah, no wine, no Seder. There's no food. I mean, they could read the Haggadah, but that was it. Rashi says also in the Megillah, Vayaver Mordechai al das. Mordechai transgressed the religion. Rashi says Vayaver means an Aveira. He transgressed the religion. You're not supposed to fast on Yom Tov. He made that the Jews should fast on the first day of Pesach. Yudalit Nisan, Tesvav Nisan, Tezayin Nisan. The first 2 days of Pesach, Vayaver Mordechai. Fascinating. Mordechai transgressed the Torah. And the Rashi uses the words Vayaver Mordechai al das. Isn't that interesting? Because Esther used the same words. I'm going to go to the king not according to the das, not according to the Torah. The das of Torah is, I shouldn't go. But yet to save the entire Jewish people, this was the right thing for her to do. And Mordechai does the same thing. Vayaver Mordechai al das. He also does something shaloi kados. He cancels Pesach that year. There's no Pesach. Everyone is fasting the first day of Pesach, the 3 day. He could have pushed all the fast till after Pesach. He did not. He had to fast Erev Pesach. He had to fast the first day of Pesach, and he had to fast the second day of Pesach. I should just add that in the Medrash there's another opinion that the fast was Yud Gimel, Yudal Tesvav. In other words, the fast began the very same day when Esther and Mordechai spoke. So the 13th day was not a full day fast that started the night before. It started in the middle of the 13th day and it continued 14 and 15. So they fasted like 2.5 days. Or even less, because it started in the middle of Yud Gimel until they got the message out. It took some time, so they fasted 2 days and a little bit. Yud Gimel, Yud Aleph, and Tesvav. And that means she went in on the 3rd day, would mean the 3rd day of the fast, which was also the 3rd day since the letters of Haman, since the decree. And the first party was Tesvav, the second party was Tezayin, and Haman was executed on Tezayin. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer brings a fascinating story. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is one of the earliest Midrashim, that when Esther gave this commandment to Mordechai to fast, Mordechai tells her, how could you institute a fast? You can't institute a fast. It's Pesach. It's Pesach. So Esther sends back a message to him. You're the head of the Sanhedrin. You're the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. You should know better. Im ein Yisrael, ein Torah. If there's no Jews, there's no Torah. You're telling me we can't fast because the Torah says we're not allowed to fast. We are here in a situation where there's not going to be any Jews left. There's no Jews left. There's no Torah. The whole point of the Torah is that it's implemented and it's lived through the Jewish people. If you are not ready to fast to save the Jewish people because of Torah, you're missing the point, Mordechai. Because if there's no Jews, there's no Torah. We have to save the Jewish people. And she felt that this fast could save the Jewish people. So you're telling me, Torah says there's Pesach, but there's no Jews, there's no Torah. There's a famous word from the Munkatcher Rebbe, the Minchas Elazar. He writes in Shai Yisachar that what Esther's intention was, that usually the Jews make a Seder and it creates such a powerful commotion and joy in heaven. The matzah and the cups of wine and the reclining and the story of the Exodus of Egypt and the Gemarah. And that year, Esther knew it's going to be silent. And heaven is going to look at the first night of Pesach and say, what's going on? Where's the Zroya and the Bates and the Gemarah, the Charosis, the Karpas, Chazeres, who's still in the Afikoyman, who's saying the Manashtana, who spilled the wine, who's hungry, who's thirsty, who's anxious, who's eating the egg, who's eating the sandwich, how much is a kazayas? Silence, eerie silence. And the absence, the void of a world and a heaven without the Jewish people implementing Torah is going to be felt, and that's going to nullify the decree. That's what he explains in the Vayaver Mordechai. So, Esther tells Mordechai to institute this fast for 3 days, and he institutes the fast for 3 days. What happens here is it's something ashaloi chadas. Esther is transcending the regular law, and Mordechai is transcending the regular law. They are both doing something very, 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 very unique. There's an interpretation by the Gemarah, the holy Gemarah. He has a book called Rabbi Sofran, Rabbi Isaac Sofran. He has a sefer called Kesem Oifir on Megillah Esther. And he writes over there, that the concept of Vayaver Mordechai is that in order to extricate people from their difficult situation, you have to go into that place. You can't take somebody out of the mud if you don't go into that place. Baal Shem Tov said, Shliach Tzibur, she'enoi mechuyev bedover, enoi moitzias rab yedei chevasa. The Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah that a Shliach Tzibur who's not obligated cannot help others dispense their obligation. So the Baal Shem Tov said that what it means is, on a spiritual level, a Shliach Tzibur who's not mechuyev, he's not guilty, he cannot take the people out of their guilt. If you are not connected to the plight of the person you're trying to help, there's a lack of empathy, there's a lack of connection. I can't help you get out. And that's why when the Jews created the golden calf, Hashem told Moshe, Lech reid, go down. You're not going to be able to help them if you stay up here. You have to go down into their situation. So what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? This is quite an insight. He broke the luchas, because the Gemarah says in the Masechah Shabbos, page 105, that when you break the luchas, when you break kelim, when you break vessels in your anger, it's a form of avodah zarah. So when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchas in his anger, in a very subtle way, he suddenly became connected to the Jewish people who created and worshipped the golden calf. And now he can help them come out. And this idea from the Kesem Oifir, Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin says it, and others say it, it's hinted to also in Medrash Rabbah, Parshas Shmos. So he says, Vayaver Mordechai. Mordechai had to go into the situation of the Jewish people to extricate them from it. And therefore, by him, there also had to be something of an aveira, some subtle transgression, so to speak, in order to be able to lift them out of their own predicament and their own abyss. And the Gemarah says, Ushmuel Amar da Avar Arkume de Yama. Rav says, what's Vayaver Mordechai? He passed through the first day of Pesach with fasting. That's heavier. Yom Nishan of Pesach. What does it mean he passed through? It means he took the holiday and he changed it into a fast day. Heavier. He passed it up for something else. In other words, Vayaver, he took Yom Tif and he made it into a fast day. He transferred it to something else. That's Vayaver. Rashi says Vayaver, he violated the halacha. That's Rashi in Megillah Esther. Shmuel says no. The Avar Arkuma de Yama. He passed a water canal. He crossed over a canal of water. What does this mean? Rashi says, Lesef HaYehudim Shebe'ever Hasheni. He had to gather all the Jews in Shushan, and there was a water canal, so he had to go over this pond or canal or brook or river, whatever it was, lake. He had to pass this Arkuma de Yama, this canal, the ditch or what is it, some pond of water that he had to pass over in order to summon the Jews from the other side. That's Pshat Vayavar. He passed over, he crossed over the water in order to bring back the Jews. Now the question is, why would the Megillah say this? Like, why is this relevant? The first idea of Rav is very powerful, that he exchanged Pesach for a fast day. But the second idea, okay, and if there was a bridge, you're going to tell me he crossed over a bridge, and if there was no bridge and if there was no lake, so he didn't cross over water, he just went a few blocks and gathered the Jews. Like, why is this so important, so relevant? I think on one basic level, it teaches you that the mission is essential. The journey towards your destination is part of the destination. In other words, the fact that Mordechai had to go over a brook of water or a pond or a lake or a water canal in order to summon the Jews, that's part of the story. In life, there is the destination, but there is the journey towards the destination. And we would always like shortcuts so we can get straight to the destination. He says, no. This is also accounted for. In other words, every detail, the fact that he went and he crossed the canal of water to get the Jews, this the Megillah takes note of. Because your journey towards your goal is essential, it's indispensable, it's not random, it's not a mistake, and it's accounted for, it's rewarded for, it has its benefits, it brings you to where you have to be. Even though you would have loved to skip the journey and get straight to the final exit and not have to go through the highway in order to reach it. That's one level. But I'm going to tell you another interpretation which comes from Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz in his Sefer Yarois Dvash, and this is what he says. The Even Ezra asks a question. We see in the Megillah Shushan HaBira and Shushan. Shushan is called the Bira, the capital, and sometimes it's just called Shushan. What's the difference? So the Even Ezra says Shushan HaBira was the place where the palace was. That was designated for the king and for the royal entourage of the king, for the royal palace of the king. No Jews lived in Shushan HaBira. There was only one Jew. And that's why the Pasuk says in the Megillah, chapter 2, Ish Yehudi Haya Shushan HaBira Shmai Mordechai. There was a Jewish man in Shushan HaBira. There was only one Jew. There were many Jews in Shushan. Esther said, go gather all the Jews in Shushan. He says, no, this is Shushan HaBira. In Shushan HaBira, in that unique place of Shushan where the palace was, there was only one Jew. His name was Mordechai. Then there was a section called Shushan. Between Shushan HaBira and Shushan, there was a lake, or there was a water canal that separated them. That's where all the Jews lived. So when Esther says, Leich Knoises Kol HaYehudim HaNimtzayim B'Shushan, she meant go gather all the Jews who are not in Shushan HaBira, they're in Shushan. Bring them together, let's pray together, let's fast together. And that's why Mordechai had to cross the pond of water in order to go to those Jews in Shushan. Why is this so important? So he says, because the tzaddik cannot help the Jewish people if he's not connected to them. He has to go out of his own spiritual cocoon and ivory tower, go over the water and go to the Jewish people and connect to them, because together we can accomplish so much more than we can accomplish alone. And that's why he says he had to cross over the water. He couldn't just remain in his own place. He had to go connect, bring everybody together. The power of Achdus, the power of unity, could nullify all of the decrees. My dear friends, we shall take a break here. God willing, we will continue tomorrow, Thursday morning, 7 o'clock. We will learn our shir in Machshava and Chassidus, and then followed by the Gemarah class. Tonight, we're having a live class, 9 o'clock p.m. We're going to learn Lekutei Sichos, Parshas Pekudei, analyzing and dissecting a very difficult and challenging Rashi in Parshas Pekudei about Moshe suddenly blessing the Jewish people. That's going to be tonight, live, 9 o'clock p.m. on the yeshiva.net. Tomorrow morning, I'll see you once again. Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach. That's going to be, so again, tonight, 9 o'clock, we have the shir. Thursday morning, we have the shir. And then we have another two exciting events. Thursday at 1 o'clock, we will have another shir, a live shir in Parshas Vayakhel. And Thursday, 4 p.m., there's going to be a special children's program on the yeshiva.net. Have a wonderful day. Stay healthy. Hatzlacha and everything.
This class is brought to you by the yeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.